Great. Yeah, I'd like to welcome everyone. Thanks so much for coming today. This event, our webinar on Generation COVID, the impact of COVID-19 on youth globally, it's part of our LIDC research seminar series, which spotlights new thinking and global development. Now, for those of you who haven't been to one of our events, London International Development Centre is a consortium of 7 University of London higher education institutions, and we facilitate interdisciplinary research and training in global development. So membership is free for students, staff, and alumni, so please do sign up and you can look at our website for more information. Now, today we wanted to explore the impacts of COVID-19 on young people globally. And we wanted to use a slightly wider lens. And we wanted to talk about not only how young people are faring, which of course is very important, but how as a group they are engaging with and responding to the wider societal challenges posed by COVID-19. So we've changed the format a little bit today. We've put together a roundtable. And because we wanted to capture the voices of this very diverse range of actors that are working in this space, from young leaders to senior academics to policymakers. So we have 8 speakers today, and we'd like to welcome them. Thank you very much for joining us. And we've asked them to present their views on how young people and youth movements are faring across the pandemic. So each speaker will get around 5 minutes. And then I thought we'd open it up to the audience for questions. And then we're going to end by asking each of the speakers their views on how the global community can better support youth and youth movements and what actions are required. So without any more from me, because I know everybody's looking forward to our speakers, I'd like to introduce the first speaker. Susan Richley, thank you very much for joining us. She is the president and CEO of the International Youth Foundation, and this is a global nonprofit working for young people. Since her appointment in 2019, she's guided the implementation of a new strategy and vision called Transformation 2022. She's championed their global equity and social inclusion work. And before joining IYF, Susan spent 25 years in leadership positions at USAID, in overseas missions and working in Washington. Thank you so much for joining us, Susan.
Well, thank you, Claire, and thank you at LIDC for the invitation. It's just wonderful to join all of you, and thank you to all who are joining from all over the globe. I'm in the US at the moment, and it's great to be with so many colleagues, and just to have an opportunity to talk about obviously the impact of COVID-19 on this generation. IYF, as Claire mentioned, has been dedicated to youth development for 30 years. So a lot of deep knowledge here that I'm going to share with you, and just and also what young people are doing and how we're trying to support it. So I look forward to learning from all of you. You know, just a couple top line points maybe to set the stage, and it comes out of a paper actually that we recently published at the Brookings Institution called Youth or Consequences, and sort of the 3 E's of how young people have been affected by COVID-19. I mean, obviously, first, employment. No surprise here that to this group that young people are always, 3 times more likely than adults to be unemployed. And the ILO has clearly captured how younger people are always more affected by recessions. And, whether that is because they work in the informal sector, the gig economy, they don't have social protection. They're often in employment situations such as tourism, retail, and food services that have been hit hard. So, that's one big E that has affected this population. The second is obviously education, with 90% of young people immediately dislocated from formal education and not having access to learning. And as we've seen the world really try and adapt to online learning, the challenges, and particularly for those who do not have access to connectivity. So thinking through how do we make learning virus proof, and I'll share with you in a minute just some of the things that we see that are happening and how IYF is working to support that. And then the third E of engagement, that young people you know, are incredibly vulnerable to being pulled or pushed into situations that are unhealthy or actually lead to greater risk for themselves. And obviously mental health being something that has greatly affected everyone as a result of COVID-19 and the isolation that has occurred. We recently, and I'm just sharing with you data that we yesterday completed doing surveys around the globe that actually validated what we had started digging into months ago with COVID-19. And we found through our survey, a global survey that's statistically sound, that 72% felt COVID-19 affected them negatively for employment, 68% for education, and 62% for engagement. So what are we doing? Well, the good news is not what we're doing at IYF, it's how we're supporting. And young people are really at the forefront. What we have found is they are the ones who are not waiting, who are leading and co-leading in really being able to be on the front lines of battling COVID-19, as well as on social justice issues, which, as you know, here in the United States and really around the globe, but have culminated, and many think because of COVID-19 and the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and just too many have really erupted into this social movement progress. And so what we're seeing with young people who are digital natives, who do believe deeply in inclusion, our Global Youth Wellbeing Survey, which you can also find on the International Youth Foundation's website, found 3 years ago that 90% of the youth generation believe in equity and inclusion. So what we see is that young people are taking hold. They are moving forward with meeting the challenges of COVID-19. Just a couple of examples. Daniela, who's a young social entrepreneur in Chile who we've worked with over the years, really took her 3D printing and is now, you know, on the front lines issuing PPE. Or Tal, who had a shoe manufacturing business in Canada, has pivoted that to ventilators and PPE. We see them on the front lines in so many ways. So one thing I wanted to share with you is we actually in June created the Resiliency Fund. Again, you can find this on IYF's website. And this is to help young change makers who are battling COVID-19, who are fighting for social justice. And we're really pleased that we have a couple of anchor funders, foundations, who are investing in this. And we hope to be able to support as many young people through this, as well as then put them in the spotlight during a virtual summit that IYF is hosting the week of October 29th, the 75th year of the UN and obviously the Sustainable Development Goals. So those are just a couple of things. I know we're short on time, so I want to be respectful of the other speakers and pass the baton, but I hope people will look at our website, look at the Resiliency Fund, look at the virtual summit, because young people are leading the way, and that's what's so encouraging, and that's what I think is going to make this crisis hopefully change the world for the better. So I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you, Susan. That was really great. Thank you. So our next speaker is Peter Fonga, and Peter is a community activist in Cameroon, and he works on bridging the gap between information and skill building on sexual reproductive health and rights amongst young people. He's currently a mobilizer and co-chair with Africa Youth Movement. He's the founder and executive director of the community-based organization Vision and Action Cameroon. Which supports young people to create programs and influence change in the areas of gender, sexuality, and health from a rights-based perspective in Cameroon. Welcome, Peter.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I hope you can see me, or I hope everyone can hear me. Can I go on?
Yeah, that's great. We can definitely hear you. You're a bit dark, but that's okay. We can hear your voice is very clear, Peter.
Okay, thank you very much. Like I was introduced, my name is Peter Fonga, and I am a member of African Youth Front on Coronavirus, and I'm representing at the same time Africa Youth Movement. So I'll give a little background about the African Youth Front on Coronavirus. It was on a Wednesday, the 6th of May 2020, the African Union Office of the Youth Envoy, with the support from support of the Commissioner of Social Affairs and Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention, that's the Africa CDC, established the African Youth Front on Coronavirus on an African framework to engage with young decision makers, engage youth in decision making to contribute to youth-led solutions and co-lead Africa's response to the pandemic, as well as support the implementation of the African Continental Strategic Plan on the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, it was 18 youth networks were identified as a result of the virtual African Union Youth Consultation Series on COVID-19, following the convening of over 400 youth leaders from 42 countries throughout 13 online consultations. Now, this initiative is an innovation of the African Union, creating more opportunities for young people's participation and engagement as co-leaders and not just recipients of responses that they did not co-create. Now, this stakeholder advocacy group is tasked to organize, mobilize, and unite youth and grassroots civil society actors, as well as support advocacy and implementation of Africa CDC communication strategy in the fight against COVID-19. I will give a little background about the impact of COVID on youth. And since the inception of this task front, the Youth Front has discussed and developed several policy briefs, which you can see on the AU Youth Envoy's website, and recommendations to assist Africa CDC in its response to the global pandemic. It's of importance to this discussion now that the consultation we held in the month of June, which elaborated the impact of COVID on young people and the immediate needs as countries were trying to build back what had been lost. During these discussions, the youth leaders noted that young people were not affected as much as the actual virus as compared to the much older population. They also noted that deaths from the pandemic in their immediate communities were not very high when compared to with the global trends. However, the youth leaders emphasized the socioeconomic impact of the pandemic, which was disproportionately heavier on young people and had direct consequences for many African youth. In addition, the global pandemic exposed the inadequacy of infrastructure, healthcare, governance, and social protection in many African countries that you can see. Now, the points below, the points that I want to raise now illustrate the major areas that the members of the Youth Front uncovered as being major impacts of the pandemic on youth. We had interruption of education. A member of the African Youth Front is the Federation of African, that's the Federation of African Medical Students Association, noted that the education of many of their members had been interrupted, as many institutions did not have the necessary structure to support out of classroom learning. In countries where online learning was attempted, access for these students was a consistent challenge due to poor internet connectivity and high costs, lack of electricity, and unconducive home environment. Rising unemployment, that's the second point I'm talking about. That's the work in the informal sector. Work in the informal sector is a standard economic condition of most youth in Africa. In this discussion, the Southern African Youth Forum representatives noted that due to imposed lockdowns, many youth had lost their sources of livelihood, as youth were majorly involved in this form of vulnerable employment. Another member, that's from the National Youth Council of Namibia, stressed the mass entrenchment of many workers, even in the formal sector, as companies were either closing down or slimming their workforce to cope with the reduction in economic activity and revenue. In this same vein, the Youth Front members, representative of East African Community Youth Ambassadors Platform, reported that many youth in their constituencies prior to the pandemic had commenced activities to be economically empowered via startup small and medium-sized enterprises. But unfortunately, the global pandemic negatively affected these activities greatly. Now we talk about the gender-based violence. The reports on gender-based violence and child marriage were were well elaborated by the consultations held by the African Women Leaders Network, uh, which highlighted significant increase in violence in many African countries, such as Nigeria. Nigeria were reported cases of gender-based violence increased by 56% after just 2 weeks of the lockdown. They noted that these cases were on the rise, with many of the survivors being trapped with their aggressors and having limited access to external support and care. In addition, the network reported that an increase in female genital mutilation in countries such as Somalia, where the school closures, lack of access to healthcare facilities, and slowing down of activities in institutions that should save to uphold justice have created an enabling environment for targeted violence against women and girls. Another trend reported was a spike in teenage pregnancies in Kenya during this lockdown. Now, the representatives of the Moremi Initiative Leadership Empowerment and Development Network, the MyLead Network, further established to this discussion, stating that it was mostly young women who had been affected by financial instability and unemployment. They noted that many of these young women were now burdened with more unpaid domestic labor, and their condition was further worsened by the financial hardship which many households now face. Now, we're talking about the worsening conditions of vulnerable youths. The refugee-led organizations network represented on the youth front by a young female leader who is a refugee living in Uganda. She noted the worsening economic situation of vulnerable youth that she worked with, who had difficult accessing food, financial support, and healthcare support as the fallout from the measures put in place to curb the spread of the pandemic. She noted that the gap between these youth, especially those living with chronic conditions such as HIV and AIDS, and healthcare providers were particularly worrisome. Furthermore, she carried out a survey among young people living with disabilities in Cameroon. No, this one, I carried out a survey among young people living with disabilities in Cameroon, which the majority of the respondents, I would put it like 86%, reported that their physical and mental health have been poor and fair, reaching even like depression. Now, one important thing to come out of this consultation was the fact that young people were asking for a radically different approach to doing things as countries attempt to build back. Actually expose a lot of systematic.
Oh, Peter, we've lost you. That's okay, Peter. I think that we'll have to catch up with you later, and we'll have to move on when you can connect back up. But thank you so much. I hope you can hear me for sharing that. That was really, really interesting and important. So our next speaker is Joseph Songo, and Joseph is a community activist at and a CEO at the Amani Institute, and this is a socio-cultural movement for change in the Kivu district of Congo. And Joseph was born in 1994, and he is living in this area of violent conflict. His work is focused on keeping young people away from involvement in armed militias, and he describes himself as both a peace builder and a journalist. So thank you for joining us, Joseph. Welcome.
Thank you, thank you. My connection is very bad. You can't see me.
That's okay,
and
Joseph.
my English is not good, but I'm Joseph Songo. I'm from Eastern DRC, and I'm the coordinator of Amani Institute. Amani, it means peace in the local language, the Kiswahili. Then the coronavirus pandemic has seriously affected us because we already living in a region weakened by conflict with the activism of armed groups and a non-paralleled humanitarian crisis with the movement of populations. Moreover, coronavirus appeared while we were still suffering from the after effect of the Ebola epidemic here in Eastern DRC, which is why I often say that this pandemic is another misfortune in my region. And the impact of the coronavirus on youth is very noticeable here at home, means in Eastern DRC, because the survey we carried out recently shows that around 46 young girls fell pregnant due to idleness during confinement. Many other young people have joined the ranks of armed groups active in the region. So my organization has implemented an initiative called Tupone Wote, that is to say heal together in Kiswahili, the local language. As the coronavirus pandemic surprised us, it was necessary to set up a dynamic of community mobilization as a matter of urgency, in particular to deal with coronavirus and its effect, but without leaving anyone behind. So our initiative includes several branches and activities, and it is in particular the production and the diffusion by the radio waves, sports, and soap operas on the barriers, gestures, and solidarity in this moment of crisis. The awareness campaign on the streets by means of megaphones, the organization of the descent in makeshift camps where the displaced people's populations lived, to raise their awareness and give a device of hands washing, but also roads on soap. The realization of the drawing hand and painting on posters to raise awareness of death, mutes, and offer them prospective masks. The development of a community vegetable garden to supply fresh vegetables to the vulnerable, in particular elderly people and women survivors of violence sexual. The popularization of a small guide to conduct in confinement, and the collection of books to read to avoid moral perversion with illness among young people. The mobilization of community radios in the region for the cessation of hostilities or community violence linked to tribalism in order to prioritize peace at this time of crisis. I have many things, but I think those are more important about the impact of the coronavirus pandemic in my region and what we done during this period. That is.
Joseph, thank you for that. I'm
I'm
sure
very
there's a lot
sorry.
of
My
questions
English is
about
very
that.
bad and
It's-
my connection is very, very bad. I don't know if I'll continue with you this time. I
okay,
don't know. My connection is
okay,
very bad. Yeah.
okay. We'll try to do. You were wonderful. That was great. Thank you for joining us. And of course, you know, as we go on, hopefully, maybe your connection might get a bit better, so you can participate in the discussions. So our next speaker is Professor Massimiliano Tarosi, and Massimiliano is the co-director of the Development Education Research Center here at the Institute of Education at University College London, which is one of our LIDC members. He holds a joint appointment at the University of Bologna. He is also professor of global citizenship and education and general education. And his research explores education practice among at-risk adolescents He's published widely on global citizenship education, intercultural education, citizen education, social justice, and qualitative research methods. Welcome, Professor.
Hi, Claire. Thank you, Claire, and thank you, LIDC, for this kind invitation. Well, in this first communication round, I would like just to briefly introduce some negative consequences of school closures, but also to raise some of the positive educational responses in line with the SDGs, and in particular SDG number 4. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the school population to severe disruptions, as everybody knows. Nationwide and localized closures are still impacting right now, at this moment, over 60% of the world's student population. And according to the UNESCO data, there's an interesting figure of the evolution over time, and I try to share my screen to show this. Where is it? Here. Okay. If you can see here, there's an interesting evaluation of school closure over time. And as you can see, the global peak of this closure was in early April, when more than 90% of total enrolled students were affected by the school and university closures. At that time, more than 1.5 billion of students, of learners, were affected by that in 194 countries, more than 90% of the total learners. So it's a huge number of people. Can you see that? Okay. Okay. Let me stop my sharing just to have an idea. But those school closure have a nice social and economic cost for people across community. The impact, however, is particularly severe for the most vulnerable and marginalized young people, as the previous speakers already mentioned, including Black and minority ethnic people, people facing gender-based violence, migrants and refugees, workers, indigenous people, low-paid irregular workers, families, children with disability, etc. So the more fragile categories of the society. Let me give you just a couple of examples. First example, the Moira refugee camp in Lesbos, Greece. In that camp, there is only one water tap for 1,300 people, and no soap is available in that camp. Another example, in another part of the world, in Nairobi, Kenya, in Mathare, one of the lower income suburbs, there are about 60,000 people living in 1 square kilometer. Based on these two examples, and in general, being aware that roughly 25% of the global population live in irregular neighborhood with no infrastructure or basic sanitation, how is possible to keep social distance in the large part of the world? And how, in particular, can children attend remotely e-learning schooling? So in this situation, COVID is demonstrating that COVID is unequal in its consequences. School disruption exacerbated, the question is that the school disruption exacerbated already existing inequality within educational systems, because those inequalities, those unbalanced situations already existed. These problems are, for example, social isolation for the large part of the population, because underprivileged learners tend to have fewer educational opportunity beyond schools. Another issue, an important issue globally, is poor nutrition, because many children and youth rely on free meals provided at schools. There are unequal access to distance learning, as we mentioned. As Joseph mentioned, there is also a very severe problem in school interruption, and particular concern for girls, as for example, the Ebola demonstrated. When schools shut down, early marriage increase sexual exploitation, teenage pregnancy, and then as a consequence, dropouts, etc. So this is not new, as I said. COVID has just made global education challenges more visible, and especially has exacerbated existing inequality. This is the main challenge. However, there's also good news, because the coronavirus also tragically showed that global problems require global responses. National or local responses are not enough, or they are inefficient. Education policy and practice need global approaches. And the good news, as I said, is that there is a global new in education in particular, and this global new in education is at the very core of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially in the goal number 4 on the quality of education, and especially in target 4.7 within this goal. And this target, I just quoting, by 2020, ensure all learners acquire knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among other, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, etc. So the target 4.7 provide an important contribution to address global inequalities exacerbated by COVID-19 through its explicit reference to cultural diversity, inequality within and amongst countries, gender equality, sustainability, and especially global citizenship. I don't have time to further develop this idea of global citizenship. If I have time, I will address this point later on, because global citizenship as the core of the target 4.7 in the SDGs is a very important goal, not only as such, but also as a precondition and a cross-cutting dimension for the achievement of the 17 goals. I stop here right now, and I hope to say something more during the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That was really fascinating. And thank you for sharing that map. That was really, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about that. All right, our next speaker is Moritz Ader. Moritz is a policy analyst at OECD Public Governance Directorate, where he's in charge of coordinating the portfolio on youth empowerment and intergenerational justice. Moritz has coordinated a number of the OECD publications on youth, including the forthcoming global report on youth empowerment and intergenerational justice, and equally the policy paper on youth and COVID-19. He also, in his free time, when he's not working on these reports, manages projects on youth empowerment in Jordan. So welcome, Moritz.
Thank you very much, Claire, and also a big thank you from our side for the kind invitation to speak today, also to LIDC, of course. For those of you who may not know the OECD, we are an international organization with 37 member countries. We are based in Paris in France. The OECD is working to build better policies for better lives across various areas, from education to employment to taxes, all the way to public governance. And I'm representing, as Claire said, the Public Governance Directorate, where I coordinate our work on youth empowerment and intergenerational justice. In June, our plans were also affected, of course, by COVID-19, and we decided to collect data on the impact of this pandemic on young people. And we published a policy paper just in June, which builds on the replies of youth organizations to an online survey in mid-April. And this survey collected replies from around 90 youth-led organizations worldwide in 48 countries, operating both at the international, the national, and subnational levels of government. And from this paper, we see 3 key messages emerging. The first one, which resonates very well with what we have heard from previous speakers, is this crisis is exacerbating pre-existing challenges around mental health, education, and employment. In our survey, mental health was identified as the single biggest concern by the participating organizations. But we also see that in other studies from the US, from the UK, that confirm that young adults have experienced higher levels of loneliness, of distress and anxiety compared to other age groups during the pandemic. Initial evidence also suggests that the lockdown, the curfew measures that have been set in place by governments have exacerbated domestic violence. In the field of education, we just saw the numbers with Massimiliano. 1.5 billion children and young people worldwide were affected by the closure of schools and universities. And oftentimes we take for granted that everyone has access to the internet, to a computer. But even across the OECD member countries, more than 1 in 10 young people from a disadvantaged school do not have a quiet space to study nor an internet connection. And the OECD estimates that a lost school year can be considered equivalent to a loss of 7 to 10% of lifetime income. In the area of employment, it was mentioned before, around 35% of young people are employed in low paid and in temporary employment in sectors that are most severely affected by this crisis. And this challenge is exacerbated in different regions of the world, including in the Middle East and North Africa, where it is estimated that around 80% of young people work in the informal sector, which offers no or less social protection, low unstable revenues, and jobs requiring physical presence with no possibility to work remotely. The second big message from our policy paper is that layers of inequalities are exposed and expose some young people disproportionately. We have heard the negative consequences of the crisis on gender equality. When we look at the containment measures, we see that they have increased women's unpaid care work, as they are frequently the ones to shoulder the burden of homeschooling and taking care of the sick and the elderly. When we look at young people in fragile countries, in conflict areas, challenges such as limited access to water, sanitation, healthcare facilities, and fragmented governance are one of the biggest challenges. When you look to Syria, the WHO estimates that around 70% of healthcare workers had to leave the country as migrants or refugees, and only around 2/3 of the hospitals remain operational. However, despite these challenges across different dimensions, we also see from the policy paper that young people are rather optimistic. They see this pandemic as an opportunity to what we call it at the OECD, to build back better from the crisis. We see governments are now mobilizing considerable resources to recover from this crisis, which may create long-lasting effects on the society and the economy. And to reflect these concerns that the policy paper describes, it recommends to policymakers to analyze more systematically the impact of their crisis response and recovery measures on young people and across different generations. And this is important across all the core functions of government, from rulemaking to the allocation of public resources to the consultation and engagement of stakeholders in decision-making. What we also see very prominently from our survey is that organized and non-organized young people, as well as youth workers, have played a crucial role in mitigating the impact of the crisis, for instance, by running awareness-raising campaigns, by supporting the elderly, and by combating stigma and discrimination. And at the same time, they continue to be a largely untapped group of partners for governments to build back better from the crisis. We invite all of you to read the full paper, which you will find online, and I'm looking forward to discussion later. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Moritz. That was brilliant. Our next speaker is Mira Bake. She's a researcher and youth advisor with Restless Development. She lives and works in Amsterdam with refugees in the Netherlands. Her research interest lies in understanding Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and far-right extremism. She works as a mentor to 50 young refugees in Syria and Eritrea. She's part of a team working on Restless Development's Resilient Realities research project, exploring the impact of COVID-19 on youth civil society around the world. Welcome, Mira.
Well, thank you so much. for this introduction, and great to be here. So, like said, I'm Mira from the Netherlands, and I'm part of Restless Development, and this is a youth-led development agency that is actually supporting the work of young leaders around the world. And what they decided a few months ago, that they really wanted to have a research where 12 young people came together from around the globe to really research the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on youth civil society. And that's what I'm doing right now. And it's participatory research, which means that all 12 of us from Latin America, North America, Africa, Asia, Europe, we are all really reflecting on our own work right now as being like a youth activist or a young person working in youth civil society organizations, reflecting on our own work and coming together to really extend our knowledge and really involve our own youth civil society communities to see like how is youth organizing during this crisis, what are they doing. So I'm a youth advisor for 50 young refugees between 18 and 30 in Amsterdam. They are from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. And I'm part of the Europe region team of Restless Development. And we were really researching the last couple of months the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on the personal and professional development of young people in Europe, and also definitely what is youth civil society doing to support young people during this crisis in their development. And there are a few things that I found very interesting and I love to share. So first of all, and that's already mentioned, of course, by the other speakers, it's becoming very clear that the impact of the COVID-19 crisis is so strong on youth. And I think actually this is something that was a little bit forgotten in the first couple of months, but especially in the Netherlands, the youth is being called at to really respect the corona measures and the social distancing, but at the same time, there wasn't in the beginning the attention for our labor market position, our unemployment, the mental health issues, etc. And we, as Team Europe, me and another girl, we talked to about 14 youth organizations in the last couple of months to see, okay, what are you doing to really support young people in their development? And on the one hand, youth organizations were so powerful during this last month to really help young people to still build their employable skills, to keep offering sources of knowledge online, to help them with soft skills, like new soft skills sort of developed, became important, like concentration, like how to communicate in your household, because these were things that didn't get attention so much before, but became so prominent right now during this crisis. And many youth organizations turned out to be super impactful during this corona crisis, but online. But when you look at the work of youth organizations that are working with vulnerable youngsters, like the refugees that I'm also coaching, but also think of young people without a house or stateless, undocumented youth. They really put forward that these young people are not really helped with digital course to learn digital skills, because there is really something else that they need. They need a sense of community, a sense of giving meaning to their lives, social support, but really face to face. And in my work, I can really say without a doubt that this corona crisis had such a huge impact on the development of young refugees that are really in the midst of their integration in the Netherlands, trying to make their life work, trying to find out what kind of education I'm going to start, really taking the first steps towards a job, towards learning the language. They were really unable to really use all the digital tools that they are, because they don't have a laptop. First of all, not all of them have a laptop. And second of all, they didn't really have the language skills to cope with this crisis and to become in a social isolation position. So the youth organizations in Europe are really also stepping into this gap, because often the local governments weren't able to really provide always in this problem, because of course the sense of community and giving meaning, giving social support is often connected to also being physical in contact with each other. And what these youth organizations also told me is really, Mira, we need also support from the government. We need, first of all, more money, but also we need special attention to really create the opportunities for young people to develop also during this time. And this cannot always be online, because we are losing really the homeless youngsters that we were talking to every day. And you see also that youth organizations, for example, offered hotels to house homeless youngsters during this time. Also, they opened their doors already a few months ago, because they just couldn't handle it digitally, because they were losing the young people that they were coaching. And this is one of the important points that I think is important to give attention to. And as a last point, and maybe we will come back to that, that is really the advocacy work of youth organizations during this period, because they are advocating their rights and the issues that young people are experiencing, but not always they are really giving the stage in countries to really have their impact on policymakers and politicians. In the Netherlands, we do have a strong network of youth organizations right now, about 40 youth organizations. We are a tiny country, 60 million people. I really stepped forward during the Corona crisis and got on the table with our Prime Minister, but still they're calling for a generational law to really always think of the interest of all generations also during this Corona crisis. But at the same time, we're not seeing systematic changes yet. So this is really something to keep giving attention to. And of course, I invite everyone to read the report of Restless Development when it's coming out in September. And this is my share for now. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for that. That was fascinating. I mean, you know, this notion of intergenerality, and can we make it a legal precedent? Absolutely amazing. So our next speaker, Professor Feng Shui Li, at the University of Oslo in Norway, and her research interests cuts across a range of areas, from childhood and youth studies, comparative education, international education, and the sociology of education. She's a contributor to a recent New York Times article discussing the possible consequences of the pandemic for how Chinese youth relate to the Chinese government, and I would encourage you all to read that article because it's fascinating. Her recent books include Urban Youth in China. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a great pleasure to be here to participate in this very important topic discussion. Actually, I haven't done any research on Chinese youth or youth beyond yet, but after I got the invitation, I did talk to people as much as possible back in China online, of course, and also try to search for emerging research in China. And I can only say that I can share some observations, preliminary observations on the short-term impacts of this pandemic on Chinese urban youth. I would say more like urban youth, because you're talking about quite a different group of youth in China when you talk about youth, rural youth. So I have prepared some slides. Let's see whether I can share it. Yeah. Yes, can you see? Can you see it?
That's perfect.
Okay. All right. So I have 3 themes to share. The first one, all the themes are about the changed attitudes and some value change. from the recent observation. So the first one, I frame it as East or West, China is the best. So you can guess that China is perceived by many as the safest place in the world right now, because of the successful control of the virus. And there's a common understanding that China has been doing a much better job compared with other countries, all other countries. I'm using the emphasis that I heard from them. And also, together with this, there has been greater approval and the discourse of the state system's advantages. Okay, they are strongly in favor of, or they see the advantages, what they frame as advantages of a strong government, a government that can command the whole nation into action when it's necessary. And they are also very aware of what is going on between China and the so-called West, especially the US. And so they are concerned about how what they call the new Cold War may affect their relationship with the world. And some of them said, yeah, now we cannot go abroad so easily as before, but we would not want to go either. So this is their current position, about China and the world. And here you can see, as I said, a strong support for the government, for strong government. And also, you can see also enhanced nationalistic pride, you can say, among those I have taught. I don't know to what extent this is representative, but this is one of the themes. Okay, the next theme is less is more, the newfound frugality. And you can guess from this theme already. And this links very well to this quite a severe economic financial situation that, globally young people are facing. And the Chinese in China, this generation of especially young people in the cities, they have never seen anything like this, and they have been living in really, you can say not wealth, but many are living in wealth and very well off, and they have never suffered from any material shortage or worry about economic disadvantages. But now there's an awareness now, poverty is not that far away as I thought from myself. So there's a lesson learned now. And then some of them also said, we must start saving money now, because this generation, many of the young people nowadays are used to spending more than they earn, for example. And then connected to this is the choice from consumerism to rational consumption. So they ask the question, is that item really necessary when they are shopping? And this is something new. And all these are confirmed by also a report on youth consumer behavior by CCTV, I think the channel of finance and economics. There was a report about for the year 2019 to 20 on youth consumer behavior. So it shows that there's a growth in deposits among youth during these months, and they are also more careful with deficit spending, as I mentioned. And here is a set of figures. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, it's about 56% of the young people tend to buy basic needs items only. 40% choose to buy less now. 40% reported being more careful in deciding what to buy. And also there has been a growth in purchase from second-hand market, the biggest platform in China for such items. It's called Xianyu, and this Xianyu platform has reached a record high in its income in the recent months. And there also has been a greater attention to how quality price compare when they are shopping. Okay, the third one, I just frame it as survival of the fittest, because among the youth I talked to, and also according to a study that I've cited below, the study on the pandemic's effects on secondary school students' value orientation in Chongqing, a southwest city in China. I think the study involved about 3,000 young people from grade one in junior secondary school in until the last year of upper secondary school. And so they also show that young people said they are more aware of health now, because it's the fittest, those who have the strongest immune system, that will be surviving from the virus. And so there's a greater motivation for training, for example. Also, there's a greater awareness about how to live in harmony with nature. So this generation of youth in China has really learned something very good. And then also they are quite optimistic from what I've heard and observed, really, about the development of in the future, and also quite optimistic about China's development as a nation. So here you can sense something. Okay, I think I stop here for the reason of time, and would like to discuss further if you're interested. This is just something really casually caught from China, just threw in another perspective from another corner of the world. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That was absolutely fascinating. I'm sure, Professor, there'll be a lot of questions. So our last speaker, last but not least, Yasveer Singh, leads the Ashoka Young Changemakers program at Ashoka Innovators for the Public. And this is the world's largest network of social entrepreneurs and innovators. And I would encourage you to look at their website. Prior to joining Ashoka, Yasveer founded a youth nonprofit to address talent inequality in the global development sector by supporting university students to pursue social innovation and entrepreneurship. He co-authored Change Starts Young, a book featuring stories of young changemakers from across India. He's one of the 20 entrepreneurs awarded the prestigious Youth Action Net 2012 Fellowship. Welcome, Yasveer.
Thank you so much for such a kind introduction, and good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I come from India, which is the land of the largest youth population in the world, and I think these. So what I bring to, or what I really wanted to share through this meeting was some real insights which are emerging by working with young people, and the advantage with which I also come from is that Ashoka is a network of social entrepreneurs, and social entrepreneurs have always been the ones who have been coming out with creative ideas and creative solutions of the problems around them. And COVID-19, as we all know, is a problem which came unannounced. All of us in the month of February and March, we were making projections and plans for the coming year, and suddenly the whole world was grappling with this challenge which no one had prepared. So that itself was a huge challenge for a country as big as India, because we certainly are a country of scale. There is such diversity from one state to another. There is huge set of inequality from rural to urban. And then on top of it, you have this challenge, which is not just a threat to life, but also livelihoods. So the impact has been profound and in many different layers. But two important aspects, of course, which impact our young people are education and employment. And that's what very briefly I'm going to talk about. So in the field of education, as we all know, One, we were all dealing with issues like access of education, improving the quality of education. How do we innovate on the teacher-student interaction, and how do we make education as innovative as possible? And suddenly now we are confronted with this challenge where we need a huge amount of different kind of infrastructure. Schools have been shut in India from last 6 months, and which I am guessing might be the case in different parts of the world as well. People or young people who can afford to use technology are still being able to cope up, but large proportions of young people are struggling because there are no schools, and they do not have access to basic infrastructure such as laptops and computers or mobile phones. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is around livelihoods. There are reports which clearly say millions of young people are out of jobs in the last 6 months. And my guess is that is just a very conservative figure, because these official reports certainly do not capture a lot of informal data or informal entrepreneurship which happens at a local, regional level. And that is, I think, one of the biggest defining challenge also of COVID in the last 6 months. Now, in this context, what we are seeing is that most of the social entrepreneurs who Ashoka works directly with, they were very quickly being able to pivot to now address to some of these immediate challenges. And the first challenge, of course, was around health and well-being. So ensuring that people have food to eat, ration supply, people have PPE kits. So a lot of these social entrepreneurs and even young change makers we work with were able to pivot their models around that. The second aspect was that now how do we intervene around creation of livelihoods? And we know there will be slightly different kind of jobs in this post-COVID world. So the whole conversation has shifted from how do we prepare our young people, not just on the transient skills which prepare them for a particular job or a trade, but something which is more timeless, right? So what are those timeless skills? In Ashoka's experience, what we call is that all young people need to master being a change maker, which essentially means we need to have a mindset and skill set and the ability to both adapt and master change, and also to thrive in this fast changing world. And certainly the world has changed very fast in those 6 months. Now, some of the patterns of hope which Ashoka has been seeing by working these young people is that one, we are very closely seeing that young people, although are faced with this huge challenge, but they are not afraid, and a lot of them are coming out with great innovative ways by which they are not trying to just help themselves but others. And there are examples where one of our young change makers, just 17-year-old, came out with this website to connect to people who lost jobs to employers, and that has helped thousands of people to get back to job. Again, someone who was very young and who could think about it. Similarly, at local level, a lot of young people have started initiatives around building skills of not just young people, but people who are out of jobs. And that's another ray of big hope. And the last bit I would just touch is that what we are also seeing is that in this entire pandemic, the need of young people having a peer community of supporters and working as a network to not just bank on their individual efforts, but also to ensure that they are collaborating and they are mapping this problem, because this is an unprecedented challenge which cannot be solved by one initiative, one approach, but it requires everyone to come together. And that openness and that frankness is highest amongst young people. They are curious, they are not afraid, and they want to come out with ways by which they can bring optimism. And this is also reflected where I was just talking yesterday, where a young person in a state called Punjab in India started a huge initiative around supporting elderly. A lot of times what we do not realize is that young people are not just beneficiaries, but they can help other vulnerable communities. And the way a group of young people came together to ensure the entire city elderly are being taken care is a great case study and role model in itself. So I just believe, and the trends which we are seeing is that young people will be at the forefront of coming out or taking the entire country out of this situation. And because this requires innovation, the kind of jobs after COVID will be different, more emphasis will be there on young people being entrepreneurs. And what we feel is this problem has made a lot of young people to be creative problem solvers as well, and they are trying their hands on launching something even from their home, a small initiative. But I'm sure the skills they will pick are the skills which we all have been realizing are the needs of 21st century, but it's just a shorter timeline for young people to prepare. I would love to share more during our Q&A, but I'm just very excited about the power of young people and how they can transform bit by bit, forming a network and a community of change makers. And Ashoka seriously hopes that very soon we'll be able to create a world where every young person has the opportunity to become a change maker, because that will give them the power, agency, and the ability not just to help themselves, but everyone around them. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for that. That's a brilliant way to end the presentations, on that kind of sparking kind of hope. So now I guess we can open it up to the audience for questions. Are there any questions? And please do raise your hand. I'm happy to start off as chair's prerogative. I mean, you have given us all in very equal measure sort of the horrors of what's happening in a very short amount of time to youth. And you've also given us hope. But what we need to lay the groundwork for change is, how can we address this globally? What are the things that we need to do to get kind of global recognition and understanding of this issue? You know, COVID, youth, the impacts on youth and COVID is not a kind of high priority issue, yet it seems like this is a real generational problem. So I'm opening it up to the round table. What are your solutions? How do we get to the solution space on this?
I'm happy to start, Claire, and just to jump in. Again, it's Susan Reichley from the International Youth Foundation. And I think that's exactly the right question to be asking now. It's just, you know, listening to all the speakers and the data and everyone from different viewpoints. And it was great to hear Yashir Singh, who was an IYF Youth Action Network fellow, and others around the world who have, you know, who've been doing this work. And the bottom line is, we have to get out there and really advocate. We have to be writing and speaking and most importantly, engaging governments, right? Because obviously, and I thought Feng Shu's presentation was fascinating, of just how young people are viewing from a Chinese perspective in the role of government, as well as multilateral institutions, multinational corporations as well. Corporations realize they need young people. They care about these issues because they need them eventually to be re-skilled and be able to help them re-energize the economy. So I think first is, we just have to be doing exactly what LIDC is hosting today and get the word out, write, speak. The article I mentioned that we published in Brookings actually got the ear of the USAID administrator, and we were able then to brief the entire leadership of USAID. And as they're working on their, what they call over the horizon, what about the secondary impacts of COVID-19, we then were able to produce another paper to get that in there. We just have to keep plugging away, because it's only going to be through all of us coming together as stakeholders and sort of multi-party partnerships that we're going to be able to create real change. I'll stop.
Okay, thank you for that. So other comments from the panel?
I can go, Claire.
Sure.
So no, just to add to what Susan just mentioned, I think when the COVID started, we had this world meter where we were all looking at how this virus is spreading and how countries are getting affected. I believe when we look at a global scale, we also need to make even the hope more viral, which partly what Susan was talking about, sharing and learning from each other. But secondly, also, I'm sure there are in this century and the kind of innovation we are seeing globally, there will be multi-dimensional innovative approaches around job creation, new models of education, which might be coming up. Now, how do we have a meter or a way by which this can be shared? Because I'm sure people are curious, they are eager to learn, but what sort of measurements do we put in? So one, we can learn how we are now coming out of the situation, because we have measured so far how badly we are getting affected. There needs to be a counter movement around what can be done, and when people can see it growing, it always gives more hope, more optimism. And the second bit is, again, technology is the best enabler. Travel is very limited globally, so using as much of technology platforms to also share, and in a very small and third bit is also, a lot of speakers have shared around looking at data, because most of the times when you look at problems at a systems level, you need to understand the gravity of the situation, what kind of groups are getting affected in one way, and then if we plan our solutions, that will be much more effective, rather than just with a lot of hope, trying to do a lot of things at a time. So those would be some of my comments which can help us globally and not just at a local level.
Great, thank you. Other comments from the panel, please?
I would like to add also perspective, also a little bit from the youth organizations, because what I noticed in our research is that sadly enough, not always it is recognized that the work of youth organizations can actually be like really beneficial for our country and can really like provide solutions. So sometimes passively, governments and politicians, policymakers are asking for the opinion of young people. They're asking their experience by doing surveys and data research. But actually in practice, then we are not really included to think of the solutions. Well, actually we are really willing to do so, and we are taking this crisis so serious, and we are really smart, you know, to really think along with the solutions. And that's why really to get this out more globally, I think it's important to give also these positive examples of youth work, so that also more and more people are you know, admitting that this can be so good for the country. And definitely I agree with Susan that also a big influence is still on the governments also to really, you know, get out the reports of the rest of development and all other institutions, and to really get this out in the international network.
Okay, that's great. Other comments, please, from the panel?
Yes. Yeah, I just also add, I think, or reconfirm, I think a strong government in this case, or similar cases, also back some years in when we had this SARS pandemic, I also saw how a strong government really could make a difference. I'm not saying that there is nothing to criticize about the Chinese government. It's a typically a different thing, and I don't want to make it more political than it is already. I mean, the virus has been overly politicized sometimes already, and I think what we can do is to, of course, to engage the government, but also use as a resource themselves. From what I've known from what I've learned from China, youth have been leading in the prevention. For example, they are the most knowledgeable, most aware, and they usually will be those who take initiatives to guide their families, the older generations, and they are also, of course, the tech-savvy generation. And they, so I think education about they can make a, maybe they can make a special contribution to education across the world about, you know, how to prevent and how to curb the pandemic from spreading further. And also, of course, to empower them, they also need education to deal with disaster, for example. And for them, this is quite new. And so this relates to my point about the importance of building global communities. And what I observe in China is Chinese youth may tend to be, you know, locally oriented. Although my observation may not be representative, I still see there's a tendency, at least among some. I wouldn't want to see a situation where China is posed against the rest of the world, or vice versa. So I think that communication is very important, that we are one. We are living in one world, and this is our home. Thank you.
Different groups and different youth groups, between countries, between continents, between movements. Do you see it as sort of aggregated? And how do we bridge those gaps? How do we get together if we're going to have a global kind of movement around things?
Yeah, well, that's very challenging, I know. But with the internet online possibilities, I think it's possible maybe to at least to enhance communication across cultural groups and national groups.
Absolutely. But then there's this whole variety, this other population that's completely excluded from digital.
That's true.
How do we get their voices? I don't know if anybody wants to come in on that.
If I may, I'd like to add another point related to your huge and important and key questions about how to promote, to advocate the role of young people across the globe. And as I said before, because of my expertise, I would like to stress once again the role of education in that. Not only the formal education in school system and universities, but also the non-formal education and informal education. So the youth, in this perspective, youth exchange, youth associations, youth activities is also part of this informal idea of education. And this informal and non-formal education is particularly suitable for the global dimension of education. What I mentioned at the end of my introduction, so the idea of global citizenship education. The very idea of global citizenship is not just a naive idea, but it could be quite a real and serious dimension, especially if we look at if we look at this educational dimension within the Agenda 2030 for the Sustainable Development Goals. In this perspective, global citizenship education cannot be regarded as a new educational content, but it's more an ethos, it's more a framing paradigm, a perspective that could allow policymakers first and practitioners to reconceptualize, to reframe old issue within a new perspective. And the very idea at the basis of this educational approach is the idea to bridge the gap between education traditions that has been always treated as separate. For example, in this idea of very bizarre idea of citizenship with no legal value at all, but just an educational value, this idea of citizenship is bridging the gap between human rights, for example, and sustainability, or in general is bridging the gap between social sphere and biosphere. And in this attempt to combine this very far educational issue and challenging, I think that there is a very important and crucial challenge for creating global citizenship and a new generation of global citizenship in the future.
Okay, thank you for that. That's amazing. All of you guys have been so great. So are there any other comments on this from the panel, please, before we go off? Because I know that there's a few questions that people are raising their hands now.
Can I just add something, please? Yes, I also believe that it is very important that we, as researchers, do generate, more research to really get a more detailed and in-depth understanding, a more comprehensive understanding of youth globally. Especially this relates to your point about how to reach, get their voice, the groups that are excluded already by the technological divide. So I think it's very important to conduct research to, yes, we know that the trends, the general trends you know, we all know everywhere is the same and more or less. But what about the more minute and, you know, the more subtle differences in, you know, the voice? So we need to conduct research, in-depth research in different parts of the world with different groups.
Great, thank you. Moritz, did you want to come in on?
Yeah, I just 3 quick thoughts. I think there's a lot to learn also from the global financial crisis. I mean, when we talk about young people today, these as a generation which went through the second big global economic shock in their lives. And we have seen that after the global financial crisis in the years that followed it, very little has happened for young people. And it took governments quite some years to react, for instance, at the European level with the youth guarantee that was put in place to make sure that young people will not suffer disproportionately from the social and economic consequences of this crisis. So what we are seeing now, for instance, when we look at the global level and the political level, for instance, the G20 has identified youth empowerment as one of 3 core areas that should be addressed this year. The Y20 is very active. A lot of big umbrella youth-led organizations like ISEC, the European Youth Forum, others are advocating to make sure that this crisis is not another one that is leaving young people behind. And I agree very much with what the previous speaker said in terms of getting out the evidence, not only presenting young people as victims of this crisis or suffering from this crisis, but also reflecting what kind of social, economic, long-term consequences would follow from not engaging young people, of not getting them back to education, not getting them back to employment. And I think one of the important dimensions that were already discussed today is that this crisis is exacerbating existing inequalities, both within the group of young people, but also between different generations. So whatever governments are doing now in terms of thinking about their recovery plans, in terms of allocating a lot of taxpayers' monies to programs to recover from this crisis, I think we would need to make sure that the inequalities, both within the group of young people, but also between the young, the middle-aged, the elderly, are not further increasing.
Okay, that's a really great point. Now, do we, in terms of opening up to the audience, do we have some questions from the audience?
Would you mind if I jump in to ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. So speaking from the perspective of someone who grew up in Sierra Leone and is half Sierra Leonean and half Lebanese, I feel that I come from 2 communities where young people are sabotaged by governments. We've all seen what's been happening in Sierra Leone recently, and more recently, how young people are literally having to take to the streets in Lebanon just to get their voices heard. So I know that we've been talking, and as Massimiliano has expressed very powerfully, the idea of global citizenship, but how on a practical level do we confront this issue of governments that treat their cabinet as though it's their personal gang? I think it's a very real demoralizing and demotivating force that we face. And I'm not sure that only working through NGOs and so on is enough to surmount that challenge. So I'd be very interested to hear what the panel would like to say about that. Thank you.
Great point. And if I can jump in, again, Susan Reichley from the International Youth Foundation, and you are absolutely right. We cannot just work on the supply side and obviously working with young people to give them the skills so that they can advocate, and even all of us advocating with them. But most importantly, it's really systems change. And so one of the 3 pillars of our strategy, Transformation 2022, which you'll see on our website, is really about how do we change systems? How do we make systems really youth inclusive? And so we're doing this around the world, mainly because if we are not tackling that issue and really putting that at the forefront, I think you're absolutely right. Young people and others will continue to be frustrated and take to the streets. And obviously we know that's where violence and you know, really harmful effects of that type of engagement. And so, you know, making sure that all of us are using our platforms and we're much more effective together, and particularly again, when we can engage business, when we can engage multilateral institutions, when we can engage large bilateral institutions. It was great just now to hear the G20. That is an important, a very important step, because ultimately it is about systems change and young people really being able not just to push the system, but to be part of the system, which comes with, as we know, a lot of responsibility and accountability as well. So I put that forward as one thing that practically we are doing, and I can talk at length, but you can just go on our website and see how we're doing it in Mozambique and Tanzania and other places, because it's got to be part of the solution.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm just going to use LIDC staff members' prerogative to let Claire know that we have Aziu Saranda and a couple of other people who would like to ask their questions. Aziu Saranda, Anna, Antonis Martins, and Naomi Bull have questions that they would like to ask. And I'm going to mute.
Yes, hello, I hope that you can hear me. Can you hear me properly? Yes? Yes, I have a question for Joseph Songo from DRC. I would like to know the current adolescent and young generation has suffered from the Ebola epidemic and from some social and political instability in the country. And I'm sure that they are a very resilient generation. And I would like to know, as Maurice mentioned, one of the main concerns from organizations that work with young people in the world is the mental health. So I would like to know, how does he think that that this resilience is helping them to deal with the current COVID-19 situation?
Does someone in the panel want to take that?
Please, can the question be reframed so that I can understand better? Please, if somebody can help to reframe the question, I didn't get it.
Yes. No, I'm asking if the situation of political and social instability in the DRC for many years and the epidemic, the Ebola epidemic, has made the current adolescent and young generation very resilient. And I would like to know how these past experiences or current experiences have helped to the adolescent and young to deal with the current COVID-19 situation.
Hello?
Yeah, were you able to get that?
No, I'm sorry, my internet is really shaky. That's why I wanted somebody who actually got the question to help me reframe it. But I got the issue of the social and economic stability in conflict settings. Is that, I don't know if I got it. Is that clear?
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so
yes.
I think that's part of the question. That's what I got. But I'll talk based on my experience from Cameroon. You know, for 4 years now, Cameroon has been through a constant instability from the Anglophone crisis and other crises that are actually affecting Cameroon. But the coronavirus actually came to actually push things to its negative end. However, the government is trying its best to actually respond both in crisis situation and looking at the issues of the current pandemic. Then you asked, but however, civil society organizations and other international bodies that are presently working in Cameroon are actually doing their best to actually push it to its forefront, to see that everybody or everywhere that we are actually working, we are actually bringing both perspectives together to actually synchronize both actions and move at the same time. Looking at it from a youth-led perspective, it has been a little bit difficult for us to co-create activities that we can actually work from the community perspective based on youth activities. But because of either lack of fundings or lack of other measures, but we have tried to push forward to actually get data from young people that can actually tell us what and how they want them to be safe in this particular situation of crisis and context. So based on that, we think that if we have the resources that we need, we are going to do our interventions that are going to be awesome according to this crisis. So your second question was on what? Sorry, so you can remind me or somebody can rephrase it. I didn't get you. I'm French speaking, so feel free to speak in French.
Yes, I think that this kind of partly answer my question. Yes, and only if you think that young people is more prepared to face the current COVID situation because of the previous issues they had, or economical and political.
Okay, just to add, we as youth-led organizations are working, the tax fund working for with young people and youth organizations. We have identified countries, identified vulnerable groups, and we make sure that these groups, which the government actually is leaving out from their programs, it might be intentionally or unintentionally, we are actually working. I give an example of persons living with disabilities or vulnerable groups. It might be LGBTQ, it might be migrant workers, it might be internally displaced persons. We actually identified organizations that are at the forefront working with these people in these communities and provide them with protective equipment with support from the Africa CDC to actually give the best education as far as this current pandemic is concerned to this group of persons. So that is our role, one part of our role that we are playing in these communities. We actually at every organization that belongs to all the 42 countries, we actually identify which is the vulnerable population that is actually based on your context. Then we look at strategies on how we can work with these people, with young people to address these strategies. I will not say that we haven't had challenges. The challenges are there, like fundraising. The funds, the relief, the funds are not, it's still very challenging with big organizations. We are youth-led organizations, but we're still competing with big organizations with the same funds. So that's the difficulty we have. But if we relax a little bit, then we are going to really reach to the people. So thank you very much.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I think we probably have time for one more question before we wrap up. Does anybody have a question for the panel? I think Anna Tunis-Martins had one.
Yes, hi. I want to thank the panel for their very insightful talks, and my question is in two parts really. You've highlighted what the damages and risks of the younger generations were by being affected by COVID now. So the first part of my question is, how can this be mitigated, and how we as a global community can support these people to help at least partly reverse such damages? And my second part is a little bit more positive, and it's around all the lessons learned and all the positive things that have come out of this moment, and how we can harness them and keep momentum for the future in that respect. Thank you.
I'll maybe jump in because unfortunately I'm already late for my next engagement, and just wanted to offer a couple things that at least at IYF are doing. I know there's so much going on, but again, to please go to our website, and we have a free resource for all young people around the world to build their life skills. It's called Passport to Success Traveler. And we were able to actually start building this about 2 years ago. And so now young people, regardless of where they are in the world, can, and if they can't be in school, as we've heard, and they don't have access to learning, this has been tested with young people around the world to just build their life skills. And we have a lot of great anecdotal information of how this has helped young people across the world just deal with what they're dealing with. How do they deal with their emotions? How do they deal with conflict, whether that's at home or in the community? So that's the first thing, just, you know, getting resources out there to people and to young people and freely. And then, you know, again, I think the hopeful thing is young people are already leading the change. And so they are out there, you know, really and we have many of them on this call, on this roundtable. And I think what we have to do is partner with them. That's why we've created the Resilience Fund, so that we can get resources to young people who are leading the change at the grassroots level. And then lastly, as we've been talking about, how do we partner with stakeholders across the globe, bilateral, multilateral institutions. So again, thank you. I'm so sorry I have to leave this. This has been a great discussion, and I look forward to connecting with all of you, either on Instagram, Twitter, through our email. Please email me, sreichley@iyfnet.org, and everything's on the chat. We've been posting up there. So thanks, and have a great day.
Thank you much. So I'm just going to wrap up my panel. I just want to thank the panelists. You've been absolutely brilliant. And I'm going to leave you with one question. Give us one priority action as we leave, take away from this, that we can do better, create awareness to support these youth movements and youth leaders. Priority action. So go ahead. Who wants to start? Just one. Okay, go ahead.
Education.
Okay, perfect. Next. Mira, go ahead.
All right. I would say include right now young leaders in your solutions to the Corona crisis impact. Right now.
That's great. Moritz?
Keep school open is a top priority everywhere in the world.
Okay, very good. Moritz?
I would look to the other side, to government officials, and making sure they have the evidence, the right skills, and the capacities to assess what kind of impact their action has on young people and different generations.
Great. Peter?
I'll talk about immediate support and welfare relief for vulnerable populations.
Okay, that's great. Listen, everybody, thank you very much. Really, you know, like I said, it was hope and horror in equal measure, but you were absolutely a fantastic panel, and thank you to our audience. And we'll be taking this discussion further, and so we hope that this is just the first event that we have on this. So thanks again, and apologies that we went over a little bit on time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.